Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new episode of Cybersecurity Blueprint, Designing a Secure Tomorrow. I'm your host, Vinod Kombishan, Head of Managed Infrastructure and Security Services for Relevance, and I'm excited to be your guide on this journey through the intricate world of cybersecurity architecture. In today's interconnected digital landscape, where the cyber threat landscape is ever evolving, the importance of robust cybersecurity architecture cannot be overstated. It's the blueprint that safeguards our data, our businesses, and our way of life. Over the course of this podcast series, we will dive deep into the realm of cybersecurity architecture, exploring the strategies, technologies, and best practices that shape our defense against cyber threats. Okay. Whether you are a seasoned cybersecurity professional looking to stay at the cutting edge of security design, or someone who is just beginning to unravel the complexities of this field, there is something here for everyone. So grab your virtual hard hats and get ready to explore the intricate network of security layers, risk assessments, threat modeling, and much more. If you find our discussions enlightening, don't forget to subscribe and share these podcasts with your fellow cybersecurity enthusiasts. In this episode to come, we will bring you expert insights, real-world case studies, and thought-provoking discussions with cybersecurity architects and industry leaders who are shaping the future of this digital defense. Thank you for joining us on this journey to design a secure tomorrow. Together, we will unravel the blueprints piece by piece to fortify our digital world against the relentless tide of cyber threats. So, without further ado, let's embark on this exciting exploration of a cybersecurity blueprint, designing a secure tomorrow. Let me introduce the guest for the day. Today, we have the privilege of hosting a true cybersecurity luminary who has dedicated the past 25 years to making the digital world a safer place. Allow me to introduce our guest, Ed Moyle. Hello, Ed.
Hello, great to be here. Thank you so much. I love the virtual hard hat imagery. That's great.
Thank you, Ed. So let me give you a very brief intro about you, Ed. So Ed Moyle is not just a cybersecurity professional. He's a visionary on a mission to make cybersecurity practical and accessible both for individuals and organizations alike. Over the course of illustrious career, he's donned multiple hats, from being a developer specializing in creating cryptographic modules to conducting groundbreaking research on vulnerabilities, including CVEs. He's walked the path of penetration research on the path of the penetration tester, auditor, assessor, researcher, architect, and consultant, with each role contributing to his extensive knowledge and insights in the cybersecurity realm. His journey has taken him to esteemed positions such as information security officer at major financial institutions like Merrill Lynch, and a trusted virtual chief information security officer for numerous organizations. He has played a pivotal role in running research and thought leadership for the global professions associations like ISACA, which also managing professional application and identity consulting services for a tier one internet provider. Ed Moyle's passion for cybersecurity was ignited right out of school when he embarked on a journey to create a Java single sign-on product for a small startup. Along the way, he discovered the power of combining his technical expertise with interpersonal skills to help others understand the significance of security and enhance the practice of fellow practitioners. This passion led him to co-write books on cybersecurity, including cryptographic libraries for developers and practical cybersecurity architecture. He's a frequent contributor to the trade press, a dedicated volunteer at events like RSA conference and InfoSec World, and a mentor to individual security practitioners and early stage security startups. So, with such a wealth of experience and a passion for both the technical and human elements of cybersecurity, we are in for an enlightening conversation today. Welcome to the podcast, Ed.
Thank you so much. I mean, really appreciate your intro was very generous. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm very excited to be here.
it's truly an honor to have you here with us today. And your journey in the world of cybersecurity is nothing short of inspiring. And I have done my best to capture the highlights. However, I understand that your career has been filled with significant experiences and accomplishments. Is there anything essential or noteworthy that I may have missed in the introduction? Please feel free to share any details or insights that you believe our audience should know about your remarkable journey in cybersecurity.
No, I think you nailed it. Just the one kind of through line is that I'm very passionate about building stuff, right? So I'm very passionate about, this is why I'm drawn to architecture, right? Because I'm very passionate about how do we build a thing, right? And how do we, build that thing in such a way that it's, that it meets the goal of what it's trying of what people needed to do. So early on, as I was a developer, that was kind of what motivated me was building secure components to help people do things like that. In terms of from a management point of view, in terms of my work in architecture and as a consultant, again, same kind of thing. It's helping people do their jobs better. And then, more recently, when I was working for ISACA. So folks, if you're not familiar with ISACA, you may have heard of the COBIT framework. So if you've heard of COBIT is ISACA, right? So I was responsible for professional guidance there, and putting together things like standards and working on professional guidance and things of that nature. And again, it's coming from the same place, right? It's all about just how do we help people do their job better. So yeah, no, that's exactly what motivates me, and that's why I'm so excited to be here to talk to you about architecture today. I think it's an area that a lot of people gloss over, but is really very important, and I think it can add a lot of value to your career as a cybersecurity practitioner.
Thanks, Ed. So let's dive right into our discussion.
Sure.
So there are a few interesting areas that our audience are looking for, Ed. So I'll just prioritize, considering time, 5 to 10 questions for today.
Sure.
The first one is on about the evolution of cybersecurity architecture. So can you walk us through the evolution of cybersecurity architecture over the past decade and highlight the key factors driving these changes?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. So the thing that I would say, right? So there's the evolution of cybersecurity architecture, and then there's the evolution of architecture, right? And I think they're related, and this may sound weird, but I'll tell you why I think that's true. So in terms of cybersecurity architecture, we've been on kind of a long road, right? And the long road is, if you go back, say 10, 15 years ago, you look, there's a lot of architecture standards that were there for things like enterprise IT architecture, security architecture. You have formal models, things like SABSA. If folks aren't already aware, SABSA is the Sherwood Applied Business Security Architecture model. Really fantastic group of folks working on this because they care about security architecture. You have things like TOGAF. So TOGAF is the Open Group Architecture Framework. You have models like MODAF, and in the U.S. there's DoD AF or DODAF. There's models like Agate. There's a bunch of different architecture models. Zachman framework. There's a ton of them, right? But the kind of the important part of it, in my opinion, the thing that why it's important, and then kind of why it's maybe a little bit not in jeopardy, but I think it's important that we pay attention to it now. So the reason why it exists is that if you look at how people buy technology, there's actually some pretty good parallels to the way that we build things like physical structures, right? The one thing that I get excited about this, I've mentioned it, in a couple of different venues, but I get excited about this, which is that there's a Roman architect, Vitruvius, right, from like 200 BC, who wrote a 12-volume series called De Architectura on what makes a good building, right? And he has a number of fundamental principles in there, but they really come down to three or arguably four, right? So it's really about strength, utility, or what we might call fitness of purpose, and then kind of like beauty or elegance, right? And if you look at how we build systems, how we build technology systems, really those things are directly parallel. Like it should be fit for purpose. It should do the thing that you want it to do, right? It should utilize resources in an optimal way to be able to get to that end result, right? It should be durable, right? It should last and work well under pressure, be resilient, right? And then even beauty, right, which makes sense in the context of a physical building. I would argue that even makes sense in the context of a technology design, right? Like there's elegant design that's simple, that's easy to maintain, that is elegant in its approach, and then there's ones that are not, right? So all of that I think is important, right? So that's kind of the trajectory of how it has been evolving. But the thing that I think is interesting now is that a lot of these models, like TOGAF has a thing called the ADM, right, which is it's a generic architecture development process, right? Or a lot of the formal models for how to do enterprise architecture or enterprise security architecture are very heavyweight. And the problem that people have is that not every company is Bank of America, right? Or the biggest of the big in terms of companies, right? Like you also have smaller companies, SMBs, mid-market, right? You have organizations that, though big, have are focused on agility, right, within the way that they build things. And if you look at like these really kind of slow moving, most organizations don't have 2 years to like plan the optimal design and socialize it and document it fully and blah, 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 right? They need something that they can do now. So I think there's like a real opportunity for people to adapt some of these approaches to a lighter weight context, because what happens is people sometimes get so bogged down in the mechanics of the process that it's like they almost can't get out of their own way, right? The process is so onerous that they can't actually get the benefit of architecture that's there. So that's kind of really why, that's the whole reason actually why Diana, my co-author, and I, we wrote that book, the Practical Cybersecurity Architecture book. It's all about how do we take these great models. Like in my opinion, the number one thing that's like currently wrong with cybersecurity architecture as a practice is that people don't know about these models, right? The models are excellent. TOGAF ADM is great. SABSA is great. But there's so much process there and so much material that it can be a little bit inaccessible for like the junior practitioner or the mid-market, right? So how do you make that accessible? And there's some ways to do that. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about some of them as we go through. But anyway, it's a great question. It's a fascinating question. I could talk about that for 45 minutes, but I'm not going to. Yeah. Thank you for
actually,
asking.
I think there are some of the questions that more relates to that. Maybe when we go through, we might have opportunities to drill down to those areas in specific, which the
Sure.
audience are also very interested to know about. So
Absolutely.
the 3, 4 next follow-up questions are related to that. One is like the threat landscape and adaptive architecture, like as you said.
Mm.
How do modern cybersecurity architects adapt their strategies to keep pace with the ever-evolving threat landscape? What are the emerging threats that are reshaping security design?
Mm. Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, so there's kind of two there. There's like how to get visibility. into kind of your current threat landscape, and then there's kind of like what are the things to watch out for. So I'm going to kind of tackle them separately, if that's okay. So I'll start with the visibility part. So I think one of the challenges that we have as architects, right, is that people say security architecture, and it's a little bit unclear sometimes what they mean, right? So a security architect can be a lot of things. A security architect can be a network person who's designing technical controls for the business. They can be a process person who's designing procedural controls and administrative controls into the business. Or they could be an application person, right? They could be building the software and making sure that the outcome of the software development process is hardened and resilient. And it's, I think, and actually, again, not, like it's been on my mind because we're coming up, we're working on the second edition of the book. So I'm not saying this to plug the book, but one of the things that we did purposefully in the book was we separated the idea of the application security architect from the what we called enterprise scope, but in years past might have been called like the network security architect. So it's because they're different, right? So it's very easy and I think productive and useful to follow a model like TOGAF ADM for the network side of the house and the enterprise scope side of the house. But when you start talking about applications, it's less useful, right? So the whole thing that I think is useful to start with is the idea of getting information from work that you already do. So let's start with an application space. The application space, anybody who takes application security seriously, which is not as many companies as I think a lot of us would like, but anybody who takes that seriously, one of the biggest tools in their arsenal is threat modeling, application threat modeling. So for those folks who might not be familiar, application threat modeling is there's an excellent book by a gentleman, Adam Shostak, who basically worked at Microsoft and was responsible for coming up with the mechanism that Microsoft would use to kind of harden their products and make sure that they're secured, right? So that process that Microsoft worked on and developed and so on at that time was the threat modeling process, and it has since been used by others, including OWASP, as well as other standards bodies and stuff. But basically, what that process entails is you map out an application into its components parts. So you deconstruct it into the component elements that comprise it, and then you look at the interaction point between different components within that application, and you examine them from an attacker's eye point of view. That's kind of the in a nutshell version. And there's different ways to do that, right? Like there's different mechanisms to do it, and it's a little bit different if you're looking at like a service mesh or like a microservices based kind of application versus if you're looking at a more legacy one. I mean, there's different flavors of how to do it, but the nutshell version is deconstruct it into parts, analyze the parts through an attacker view, right? So I think from an application side, that is the way to go to get visibility. In terms of like pulling back a level and kind of looking at the other way that you might approach it, looking at kind of the business processes, the underlying technical substrate, et cetera, but not applications necessarily. This is going to come down to, at a high level, controls that you might be managing yourself against anyway. So if you're in an environment, for example, that maybe it's a bigger shop, maybe they have gone through ISO 27001 certification, right? You're already measuring yourself against the catalog of controls. That catalog of controls is, ISO 27001 Annex A, the 130 odd controls or whatever that are in the back of that standard, right? So you have a way to understand kind of your performance against that. The same is true if you're in a NIST environment, right? There's 800 SP 853, right? That's kind of a control catalog. HIPAA has one. There's the SANS, CIS, sorry, top 20. There's a number of different control frameworks out there, COBIT, right? So you can analyze yourself against that at a high level. I happen to think that it's productive to look at effectiveness, like are you meeting the intent and rigor of that control or not? Also to look at maturity of implementation. So like using something like a CMMI benchmark, like how well are you meeting, how mature are the implementation of that? And then also looking at it through an economic lens, right? Because a lot of times people don't know what their controls cost to operate. So I think starting with that is helpful. That gives you kind of a very high level course view. You can obviously, from that, build out metrics and telemetry that help you get a better picture into those things. The one thing that I would say that, so there's a lot there, right? In terms of how do you get the information. The one thing that I would say that I think is overlooked, underutilized, is the economic view, right? So like you think about in security, and there's an opportunity cost to everything that we do. And opportunity cost is basically like if I set up a control to do phishing simulation, that means that there's budget and time that are not available to me to do something else because I'm doing this other thing, right? So it behooves us to know, well, how much does it cost if I do this versus how much does it cost if I do this other thing? And how much risk do I mitigate by doing this versus doing that? And so there's like a metric out there, which is kind of like the holy grail, which is like risk reduced per unit cost, right? Which very few people even try to get to that level of understanding of their controls. So I think that's important. I think it's interesting. That's kind of the visibility piece. The forward-looking piece, like with emerging stuff, I think the answer for that, I think there's a right answer to that, and I think it's not going to be the one that people expect, right? I think it's empathy and engagement. And that's going to sound weird, right? Because it's like, well, but shouldn't it be about the technology? There's always going to be some new thing, right? It's like Men in Black, right? Where they're the movie Men in Black with Will Smith, where they're like, there's always some like battle cruiser that's like going to attack the Earth, right? There's always some big problem that's new, right? Right now it's AI and ML and data science, right? And tomorrow it might be, deep fakes or, large language models or whatever it is, right? There's always some new thing. But the mechanism that to know that the new thing is coming is the degree to which the folks in the business you support trust you, engage with you, your utility to them as a partner. Like if they see you as adversarial, that's it, right? Like that's as far as it can go. So anyway, that's kind of just a useful thing.
Right. So since you said about trust and empathy, the follow-up question is on zero trust architecture. So zero trust has gained prominence as a security model. Can you explain the core principles of zero trust architecture and how organizations can implement it effectively?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, so the thing about zero trust, basically what it is in a nutshell. So there's a lot of vendors who will tell you that zero trust is about buying their product, right? Or you need to do a particular thing or have a particular technical strategy in order to do it. And I don't think that that's true. In my opinion, zero trust is a philosophical thing, right? So it's basically assuming that everything in your environment is already compromised, right? So you're starting from the position of the network itself is adversarial. The applications that are in your scope are potentially already compromised. The users are untrustworthy. Like you're basically assuming that things are already pretty dire. And if you start from that viewpoint and you build in the mechanisms to keep those, to keep that protection there, to make sure that things stay hardened, even though there's this potentially adversarial, potentially hostile stuff on the network. That's kind of the distillation of what zero trust is. Now, in terms of actual practice, so that's the philosophy part. And then there's the practical implementation part. The practical implementation part comes down to at the point at which access to a resource is granted, you want to be able to strongly authenticate the requester. You want to ensure that there's no special level of trust just because of the fact that, where a particular thing happens to live. Like, so for example, if a particular device happens to be on your internal network, there's no implied trust there, right? It's basically, you're looking at it just the same way that you would some untrustworthy thing that connected in from the outside. So in order to actually make that happen, there's a lot of things that go on there, right? There's encryption internally, right? Like making sure that confidentiality is protected between nodes. There's making sure that you're robustly authenticating access to resources, right? So there's a whole identity management story and a whole authentication and authorization story that's baked into that. There's things like making sure that your vendors are adhering to the same kind of principles, right? So they're not assuming that because you're employee of XYZ that a really good model for this actually, like and I know some folks may have heard of it already, but for folks that haven't, Google has a really great kind of theoretical use case for this that's called BeyondCorp. So if you haven't seen the Google BeyondCorp resources, I would encourage you to just Google that and check it out. They've done, I think, a really good job of kind of distilling down what does zero trust mean in terms of the practical implementation. But yeah, again, a really great question. I think that's an important one for folks to know.
Yeah. So I think this is going to be a follow-up to what you said, Ed, is like security by design. So how can organizations embed security into the development lifecycle of applications and systems? And
Right.
what role does security architecture play in the shift left approach?
Yeah. No, I think that's huge. And I think there's a couple of things to this, right? So the first one is that I think what's missed a lot of times is the fact that the way that you do something often dictates what you get out of it, right? So like so the quote that always pops into my head is Aldous Huxley, right? Aldous Huxley basically at one point said, well, the ends can't justify the means for the simple and obvious reasons that the means determine the ends. Like the way that you do something. Like so if you follow if you follow a slipshod, non-systematic, chaotic process, you are going to tend to get an outcome that is slipshod, chaotic, and non-systematic, right? You're going to get like garbage in, garbage out, right? So I think there's like, I think it's part of the role of the architect to make sure that the actual mechanics of the process that you follow to develop software is resilient, trustworthy, basically adheres to sound design, sound engineering principles, and so on. So that's kind of number one. In terms of how do you shift left some of the specifics of what the application, what the architect, the security architects do, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think one strategy that we all should be pursuing is automation, right? You look at a lot of the tools, like we talked about some of them already. We talked about threat modeling, right? We talked about things like dynamic application security testing, static application security testing, penetration testing, the threat modeling, obviously, that I mentioned already. A lot of these things, they're like either detective controls that happen after, right? So they sort of presuppose a either agile model or a waterfall model where there's some kind of like stage gate, right? In DevOps and DevSecOps, that there is nothing there, right? Like there's no gate. Like you don't want to slow down the whole development apparatus while you go, spend a week reviewing something from a threat modeling standpoint. So I think the degree to which we can automate controls is valuable. And I think honestly, every security architect who interfaces at all with development should be thinking about how can they automate some of this. And there's opportunities too, right? There's things like container scanning tools. There's things like DAST, which can be automated. There's there's projects out there like open source projects, for example, that will consume Terraform as input and produce data flow diagrams as output, right? So this is a way to automate, right? You can, if you are in an organization using Terraform, you just consume the artifacts already that are being produced, and you can automate large portions of the threat modeling process. So I think being aware of those things is important. I think, and again, this is going to sound a little cheesy, so I'll just preface it with like, this is a little bit kind of trite of an answer, but it's the truth, which is that again, it comes down to engagement, which is I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. Like, so in the organization, like in my day job, right? I work a lot with the development teams. And the one thing that I'll do is we have a process of vendor review, like I'm sure most organizations do. Like, so if there's a new software component, we review it and stuff like that. So for the development teams in the organization I work for, I will do a lot of that work myself. Like I will I will do the work of filling out the forms for them. I will, rather than having them to require them to like look at the vendor and, you know, provide answers, I will do it, right? And the reason I'm doing that is I try to make it as easy for them to engage, as frictionless for them to engage with me as possible, right? And the reason why is because I want them to see me as like a true partner, so that when they need to do a thing, they come to me right away. And I'll help them do stuff that doesn't even relate to security. I'll say, hey, this is not a security problem, but you know, if you did this, you get better performance. If you did that, you know, you should talk to this team over there because they're working on some library that might be helpful to you. Like, if you can demonstrate value and engage with them early, it really helps you in terms of shifting some of that left. So I think it's automation, and I think it's being plugged in and engaged with those folks from the very earliest parts of the life cycle.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for that insightful response to that. And regarding the resilience and disaster recovery, in a world of persistent cyber threats, how should cybersecurity architecture be designed to ensure resilience and effective disaster recovery?
So the approach I really like is the so Netflix has done some really great work in this. So basically, for those folks who aren't familiar, Netflix has like these little bots that just, their whole job is to run amok in the environment and, you know, turn off services and just basically create chaos. They call it, you know, chaos monkey, right? And they've purposefully introduced this problematic thing into their environment so that engineers design around the idea of, well, hey, this thing could be turned off at any second by this chaos bot. So I need to design around resilience. So if this thing goes out, well, there's another one immediately that can come in and just pick up exactly right where it left off, zero impact to the customer. I mean, so that kind of approach is like a little bit of a holy grail, right? A lot of us aspire to that, but don't quite get there. But I do think that what we were talking about before, in terms of, you know, things like automation, I think that helps. I think if you can automate if you can automate elements of the security testing process, and it makes them less error prone, right? The more you can remove human error from the equation, the more resilient that process becomes. I do also think that kind of like looking at it less from an application and product security view and kind of more from a enterprise operational view, kind of like more of the blue team view. I think one of the things that I see folks not consider a lot, which I think is important, is there's kind of two elements to disaster recovery, right? And resilience. One element, of course, is the one that we all know, which is baking in high availability, you know, using the things like, I know we talked about it earlier, but things like service mesh, right? Things like you know, building in the fault tolerance, right? Building in the mechanisms that help foster resiliency. But I also think that in an actual scenario, like in an actual disaster situation, it's also important that the controls continue to operate, right? Because one of the things that you'll see is, I mean, the beginning of COVID was this way, right? Like where people needed to get access to stuff. So a lot of the security controls just kind of went out the window in some places. And that's not desirable either. So I think it's twofold. I think automation is good. I think planning is good too. You know, so if you're not doing things, if you're not plugged into the BCP process, you should be. BIA, so business impact analysis, right? For folks who've done business continuity planning, one of the key things you need to do first is business impact analysis, right? BIA is so useful as like a discovery capability, that I mean, you can use it for so much, right? You can use it to find you know, AI and ML initiatives, right? You can use it to find cloud. You can use it to find shadow IT. If you're talking to these teams and you're asking them detailed questions about how they do what they do, there's so much opportunity to data gather and build the relationship. So, I mean, how do you build in resiliency? I think it kind of starts with that engagement. It starts with, you know, doing your planning. It obviously the technical side is important too. So yeah, I think there's a lot there.
Yeah. So, since you touched AI and ML, I have one question on that area. So I just get there before getting into
Sure.
the so the behavior analytics and AI. So how can a
Mhm.
behavior analytics and artificial intelligence be integrated into cybersecurity architecture, especially to enhance threat detection and response?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so there are so number one, there are firms that specialize in this, right? So there's kind of three layers to this answer, right? So the first one is we all know anybody who's worked in an environment that has developers in it, you know that there are it's hard to stay plugged into what they're doing, right? Particularly kind of the legacy model of CISO, right? Like the legacy way that people go about doing security, they're not really very often plugged into what the developers are doing, right? At all, right? So security, application security is already hard. And now that you're talking about the subset of application security that involves actually dealing with things like, you know, AI integration, ML, data science, right? Like there's a whole universe of stuff that's going on of people building things that we from in the you know in the traditional security world have like zero visibility into. So there are firms that specialize in that. So my co-author Diana Kelly on the Practical Cybersecurity Architecture book, she works for a company called Protect AI, and Protect AI, their whole thing is that, right? They're trying to raise that visibility to the traditional security practitioner so that they can know what's in their environment. So that's kind of one layer to the answer. Another layer to the answer is that there are security products that incorporate AI functionality into them. I mean, there's a number of companies that do this, but there are companies that are solely an AI play, right? Like, so there's companies like, you know, the one that pops into my head because, you know, I am kind of friendly with them is Cienega Systems. So they basically provide machine learning AI type capability to find and detect security issues, right? So that's kind of also vendors like the big players, CrowdStrike, FireEye, you know, like all of these, you know, Cyber Reason, right? They're actively right now working on building out their capability to use this type of approach in you know, forecasting and finding issues and, you know, doing things like threat hunting, et cetera. So that's kind of the second layer to it. And then of course the third layer to it is, you know, how do we make use of this capability? How do we defend ourselves against things like deep fakes and you know, exposure so for example, folks may not be aware of this, but Samsung for I think it's still banned, maybe not, but for a period of time Samsung had globally banned the use of ChatGPT because of the fact that critical sensitive intellectual property was making its way into ChatGPT, and because they use people's queries to refine the model, that stuff was starting to, you know, to find its way into those places. So that's kind of the third one, which is being alert to what these trends are, understanding kind of the misuse cases of how they might be applied to make everybody's day worse, and you know, staying ahead of how to fix them. So it's a nuanced. There's a lot of nuance there, and I know I kind of went all over the place, but it's a huge question. It's absolutely in a period of transformation. I would be encouraging people to stay alert to the misuse cases, be plugged into, you know, if you're in an industry that has an ISAC, an information sharing and coordination body, stay plugged into that. Pay attention to the news, right? Be alert to those things. Be alert to what your vendors are doing and your own internal teams in terms of their use of this stuff. But yeah, no, it's a huge thing. I think this is going to be with us for the next few years. It's going to be majorly impactful and transformative.
Right, right, right. Actually, Ed, we had a podcast recently on this, especially the AI dilemma in
Mm.
using the threat detection while training the data sets. We expose a lot of privileged information, and we are also
Mm.
having a webinar in November to elaborate on this because there's a lot of interest from the audience. So we have a webinar planned on November. So a great, I think actually it's adding value to that particular webinar and the audience today. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like I said, I mean, the more info, I mean, a format like this one is perfect for that because, you know, one of the things that I really like about this format is that you can kind of go a little bit deeper than you can in something that's a little bit more surface, right? So yeah, I'm now that you tell me that, my next thing is I'm gonna go take a look at that one because I'm interested in that too.
Yeah, sure. Right. Couple of other interesting questions that we had is like cloud native security and identity access management. So, in terms of
Mm.
cloud native security, what they ask is like, with widespread adoption of cloud services, what are the
Mm.
unique challenges and best practices for designing cybersecurity architecture in a cloud native environment? In terms of
Mm.
IAM, since that's being a critical component in cybersecurity, how should organizations architect their IAM solutions to strike a balance between security and user experience?
Yeah, I mean, so the IAM one, I'm going to kind of fold the IAM answer into the kind of the bigger picture, if that's okay. I mean, because I think it's true for a lot of things, but um, one of the things that happens, and this is like for the tradition, like again, it sounds like I'm picking on the traditional security viewpoint, which I'm not. I don't intend to do that. But a trap that people fall into, right, is that some new thing comes around, infrastructure as code, for example, right? Terraform, that kind of thing, comes around and people are like, oh my goodness, like this, this is the end of the world. It's so risky, blah, blah, blah. Right. But I think if you're like a practically oriented kind of person, right? There's a way in which that's actually better for you from a security point of view. Like I would much prefer to be in an organization that's using something like Terraform. Why? Right? Because I can at any time, if I can get access to the Terraform files, I can go look at what the intended state of that environment was intended to be. I can query the running state to find out what configuration is it currently in, right? There's a lot of information. Like I can actually, if you're using Terraform, I can automate or certainly at least streamline 80 to 90% of the security reviewing process that where I don't have to occupy developers' time. I don't have to go meet with operations people to ask them about, this thing connects to that thing. Let's put it up on a whiteboard and like talk about like the protocol that it uses to go from here to there, right? I know because I can look at the Terraform and it tells me, right? So it saves everybody's time. So that's kind of, and that's true that's true of infrastructure as code. It's true of things like containers. It's true of things like, so with containers, right? Like for folks so by containers, I mean like application containers like Docker, Rocket, that kind of thing. For folks who aren't familiar with that, basically what a container is, it's you think about it like the analogy is to like a shipping container, right? Like to what you see on a railroad or on ships, right? Container transport ships. It's basically like a way to deploy an application because it carries with it inside the container the actual application, but then all of the various middleware and libraries and stuff that it needs to run, right? So something like that is very conducive. It's helpful to me from a security architecture point of view because I can know, well, what is required for this application to run? I can scan that container. I can know what's in it. I can look at the manifest. I can understand what the versions of the intermediate libraries are, dependencies, and so on. It's much easier for me to understand the actual nuts and bolts of how that thing is built if it's in a container than if it's on just some random web server somewhere or in a virtual machine, right? So through a certain lens, a lot of this cloud native stuff really bolsters security. So I know a lot of people, the traditional wisdom is people are scared of it, which I get it because it's new, right? So anytime there's, some new thing, like the quote is like, what fresh hell is this? Right? What is this new thing that's going to occupy all my time? But if you look at it and you're practical about it and you're creative, I think you can actually use it to bolster security. So I think it's actually kind of a good news thing. So yeah, I think, and the IAM story is similar, right? IAM, you look at something like, an external identity provider, or you look at something like OIDC Connect or OIDC, I guess, OpenID Connect. You look at, something like that, right? And like these things actually help you, I think, like, because they give you, or just to pick on, I'm just going to pick on a random tool, something like the Ping DaVinci tool, right? You can see graphically laid out the whole authentication flow, and that actually helps you. So even though, yes, there's new changes that are happening and it's different ways of doing things, and it's not radius anymore, it's like some new thing, right? Like, yes, there's some things to learn, but it also, I think, if you can get ahead of it and get in front of it, understand it, and have a good relationship with your technology partners, it helps you.
Right. That's it. Actually, it's very insightful and more technical side of things, like you touched containers and yeah. So I think, well, whenever we have a podcast, like mostly the security experts are not so tech savvy, and we
Oh,
just
thanks.
get all these controls and all this, but not the technical elements, which is the real essence of where the security is getting implemented. So yeah, it was a very
Well,
nice.
thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, this has been very enjoyable. I mean, really appreciate your having this venue, because I think I think this level is where security needs to be. And I agree with you that it often doesn't get to this level, but I think that's a missed opportunity, and I think it should.
Right, true. And since for the want of time, Ed, I would like to conclude with one last question, because this is one of the important questions that most of the security experts and professionals are looking for. So it's on the governance and compliance piece of it. In an era of strict regulatory requirements, how can organizations ensure that their cybersecurity architecture aligns with the compliance mandates while maintaining flexibility and agility?
Mm. Yeah, this is a good one. I mean, I think, I do think it's productive to start from, a lot of people will say compliance is not security, right? And that's true, right? But at the end of the day, you do have to conform to these mandates, right? And compliance actually can help you get budget for things that you might not otherwise be able to do. There's good reasons to do that, and there are some exceptional controls catalogs that are out there that map to particular sets of compliance requirements. So I think building a relationship, and again, I know I keep talking about relationships because I think that's the most important thing of this about this discipline. But if you have a good relationship with your governance, risk, and compliance folks, like if you have a separate compliance team, if you have a separate, internal counsel, having that line of communication is good. Also having a good working relationship with your auditors, right? So I worked for ISACA, right? Like, so audit's going to figure its way into it somehow. So having a good relationship with your auditors, right? So that, because the thing is about like these auditors, like, nobody sees more of the business and the technology that drives the business than your audit team. So if you can plug into that, that's money in your pocket, right? So so I think it's important. I think establishing the lines of communication is important. I happen to like using things like ISO or NIST or HIPAA or whatever the particular case may, PCI, whatever your particular requirement is in your organization, right? I happen to like using that as kind of the benchmark against which, we measure performance. So like basically use that as kind of the backbone for how you look at yourself. I think that's a good way to start. I mean, that on its own is not going to get you to compliance, but it's a good starting point and a good way to make some progress.
So yeah, thanks, Ed, on that. So we have reached the end of yet another enlightening episode on cybersecurity blueprint, designing a secure tomorrow. We hope you found today's discussion more both insightful and thought-provoking. A heartfelt thank you to our esteemed guest, Ed, for sharing your profound insights and expertise in the field of cybersecurity architecture. Your contribution is invaluable, and we are grateful for your time and knowledge. Uh, to our dedicated audience, your continued support motivates us to bring you these conversations. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, and share it with your peers and spread the wealth of knowledge in the realm of cybersecurity. As we conclude, we invite you to stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we will continue to explore the blueprints that shape our digital defenses. We have a lineup of exciting guests and topics that promise to ignite your curiosity. Remember, in the world of cybersecurity, knowledge is power. Stay informed, stay secure, and keep designing a secure tomorrow. Until next time, take care and keep building a safer digital world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. It was a wonderful session I had.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like I said, I meant it. I really like this format of what you're doing. I think being able to go deep on a topic. I mean, I will tell you, I mean, the traditional wisdom, a lot of people will say keep it short, keep it under 10 minutes. But I like what you're doing. I think that this is really good, that you're able to go into explore a topic a little bit more deeply. So yeah, no, I love it. And yeah, I mean, I'll if when it's up, I'll obviously do, share it on LinkedIn, and I'll try to drum up attention and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I think I'm excited about what you're doing.
Please, Ed, and if there's any webinar topics that comes up around the security architecture, I would like to be a guest there and share more insightful knowledge where we can focus on specific areas and enlighten.
Yeah, well, yeah, let's keep in contact. Like I said, great what you're doing, and yeah, I'm going to be a subscriber, so like, I'll be paying attention to what you're doing, and yeah, thanks, and thanks for having me on, and really great to do this.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
have a good night.
Come to India, please visit us. We'll get you
absolutely
100 varieties of dosas in my state, so you're
I love it. I absolutely love it. All right. Well, yeah, thank you. And yeah, and enjoy the rest of the night.
Yeah. Thank you. Cheers.
Right,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Have a great
Bye.
day.